Hey everybody, my name's John. I'm one of the pastors here. It's great to be with you today. Hey, since we're starting a brand new series, I thought it'd be fun to kind of start out in a different way. We've never done this before. If you're brand new and your first time here and you're like, what? We might not do it again if this goes poorly, so it's all good. So we're going to use this thing called story cards. Now, we use these a lot in my community group. If you're in a community group, you may have used them before as well, but basically all story cards are pictures on different cards, and you set a bunch of these cards out, and here's what you do. You ask a question, and instead of just having people answer, because sometimes the answers are really short, you ask them to pick the card that best represents their answer. And then our group sits down and we go around in a circle and we share which card we chose and why. And usually that card leads to a longer story. Thus, they're called story cards. And so I thought it'd be fun if we did a story card exercise this morning to start our time. So here's the question that I'm going to ask you. Which story card, I'm going to give you 3 to choose from, which story card best represents how you view your upcoming week? Got that? How you view your upcoming week. Now, here's the first card you could choose from. Here's the second card. And the third one. All right, we're going to put all 3 next to each other now so you can see all 3. And here's how we're going to do it. I want you to find someone next to you. And in about 30 seconds, I want you to explain to them which card you chose and why. And then pause and give them 30 seconds to tell you which card they chose and why. And then we'll all come back together. You ready? Go. All right, we're at 30 seconds. So go ahead and let the other person go. All right, go ahead and wrap it up. All right, how was that? Was that fun? That was pretty cool, all right. Here's what I learned. You guys are pretty loud, so I better hear some amens and some other stuff today, right? I know you got it in you. Well, as I said before, my community group uses story cards all the time. It's a great way to open up conversation and start dialogue. In fact, families, parents, that might be something cool to introduce in your family. It's just really neat. And in our community group, every time we've taken like an extended break, maybe for the holidays or for the summer, I've kind of gotten the rhythm of asking a very similar question. And here's the question I kind of ask. Which story card best represents your life over the last month? Or if it was over the summer, which story card best represents your life over the summer? And here's what happens every time I ask this question in group. There's a mad rush as they stampede to where I have the story cards because they all want the same pictures. Because the same pictures show up every time I ask this question. Here's one that always shows up. I feel like I'm out of gas. I'm running on fumes. I need some refueling. Or maybe this one. My life is chaos. I feel like I'm heading in every direction. I don't know which way I'm going anymore. This is a popular one. All right, Jenga, I feel like one more move, one more piece, and I'm going to topple over. Of course, for our church, this is another one that pops up, right? Coffee. I'm running on fumes and I need caffeine. I'm just basically living on caffeine. I'm so exhausted. And before we put the last one up, I'm going to tell you, this next card is our favorite. It doesn't need any explanation, but some of y'all feel like this right now. Here's the last card. Yeah. That's it, right? I noticed this week she has a little sticker that says happy. She's not so happy. And so if I asked you that question today, right, and gave you story cards to pick, my guess is that you probably resonate with one or more of those cards as well, right? We all do, because it doesn't matter what age you're at this morning, what season of life you're in, what time of year it is. It just feels like we're all running frantic, exhausted, tired, anxious, stressful, and we're just plain wore out. And so our church and our community and our world, I feel like we've become the burnout society. We have, haven't we? We become the burnout society. There was a recent human resource study in 2023, 65% of employees said that they feel burnout because of their employment, right? The number of hours they're putting in or just the stresses associated with work. If you're here today and you fall in my age group, so let's say mid-40s and up, well, we were part of a work hard, play hard generation. And when we grew up, it was an era of prosperity and the American dream was within our grasp and all we had to do was grab it. And so a lot of us, including myself, by the way, we are classic workaholics. We work. We find our identity in work and titles and success and achievements. And because we work so hard, we also like our expensive toys. Because if we're going to work hard, we might as well enjoy the fruit of our labor, so we play hard too. Now, just so you don't feel left out, millennials in the room, mid-20s to lower 40s. You guys grew up in an era where technology and communication, it just moved at a lightning speed, right? And so as a result, you guys are always connected. You had a computer that went to a laptop, and a dumb phone that went to a smartphone, and a tablet. Now you got a watch, and some of y'all wearing a ring that tells you what's going on in your life. And because you're always connected, you're never at rest, ever. Now, millennials, you got a second thing going against you, and that's that you were raised by us, the work hard, play hard generation. And we had a great idea. We were like, if we got successful working hard and playing this hard, what would happen if we got rid of all our kids' unstructured free time? Remember that whole thing, unstructured free time? The lazy days of summer? They don't exist anymore. We fill your time. We optimize your schedule with more sports and more arts and more socializing and more everything so you don't miss out. And millennials, as much as you might want to complain about adulting, as much as you might want to complain about the pressure of living in a changing society and economy, guess what? You're raising your kids the exact same way. You don't want your kids to miss out. Or you don't want to be the parent that lets their kid miss out. One of those two, right? It's one of those two. And so if I had to pick a story card for all of us today, right? One story card that described where we're all at right now, it would be this. We're all just like hamsters on wheels, turning and turning and turning. It's the same old shift. It's just a different day. Some of y'all get that later. There's an author who wrote a book called The Burnout Society, and this series is not necessarily based on that book, but he makes some interesting observations that are worth looking at. And the first is he would submit that we've become an achievement-based society. That we moved from what we should do to instead what we could do. And because there's so many coulds, there's no rest in an achievement-based society. In fact, he'd say that we're not necessarily overwhelmed by the negativity, that our burnout comes from all the possibilities, right? The unlimited possibilities. And because there's so many coulds, and we're worried we chose the right one, or is there another one out there we should chase, we've developed FOMO. Who knew that was even a thing until recently, right? We've got a fear of missing out. And so, parents, grandparents, you're burned out. Students, kids, you're burned out. Singles, marrieds, we're all burned out. And when I look at our burnout and our FOMO, and are constantly chasing the coulds, I think there's one word that's kind of at the root of it, right? That drives our decisions, it drives our thought processes, it drives the burnout we're feeling, and that one word is more. We're constantly after more. There's more to do, more to see, more to learn, more to buy, more to experience, more. And ultimately, you chase so much more that you get burned out. And we're going to define burnout for this series as your soul no longer bearing the weight of your life. You're chasing so much more, your soul can no longer bear the weight of your life. And so as a result, in our constant pursuit of more, many of us are experiencing less, aren't we? Right? Less satisfied with ourselves and with our lives, less effective parenting, less healthy marriages, less effective relationships with our friends and our family and our kids. We've got less money to spend. We're less healthy physically and mentally. And yet we continue to chase more when in fact the only one thing we need more of our lives is margin. Margin's the space between our pace and our limits. It's the space between what we should do and what we could do. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, right? We've talked about this as a church before. My guess is you've talked about it at home. You've maybe read books and listened to podcasts and maybe even watched something on TV about it. So why does burnout continue to be a problem, right? Why do we constantly chase this desire for more knowing it's going to burn us out? Well, I believe that more is tied to our human nature. That more is just part of our human nature. I mean, look at the book of Genesis, right? The first couple chapters in the Bible, it gives us the origin of our universe and the origin of our world, our origin. And you got God in his infinite wisdom at the very beginning, his infinite love for us. He makes us, creates us in his own image, which by itself is crazy, right? In his image, that's amazing. And then he says to us, when we're brand new, right? We still got that new car smell to us. We're mint condition, right out of the box. And he says, hey, I'm going to give you everything you need. I'm going to give you a great place to live. I'm going to give you amazing food to eat. I'm going to give you purpose, something to do. You can name the animals. You're going to be in dominion over them, right? You're the head honcho. I'm even going to give you a companion, someone that you can love and partner with and experience life together. I'm giving you everything you need. Look around. All this is yours. But that one thing, that tree, just don't eat of that tree. And you know how the story goes, right? The serpent, Satan, he comes to Eve, and what does he tempt her with? What does he try to convince her she needs in her life? More. Hey, Eve, you could have more. That more is within your grasp. And here's the thing, I could argue the Garden of Eden was the start of FOMO. The fear of missing out, because Eve, if you don't eat that, you could be less. If you don't go after more, you're going to be less. And you don't want that. And so from that moment in the garden until now, our human nature, we have been wanting more, and more. And even with Eve and Adam and with us, our constant pursuit of more, it kind of begs this question within ourselves. Do we trust what God has for us, or is he just holding us back? Right? Do I truly believe God has given me and provided everything I need, or do I need more and he's just not telling me? And so this morning, as we open up this series, as we're going to look at this subject over the next 5 weeks, I want to fast forward a few chapters in the book of Genesis. We're going to look at another well-known story today, but before we do that, I want to stop and give us a little bit of context into the story because it'll help us as we get into the discussion. So you've got Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And they're evicted, and they move out of the garden and they start having more kids, right? More people, population starts to grow. And as the number of people grow, so does their disobedience against God. They're constantly wanting more than what God had for them. And at one point early in our world, it gets so bad that God decides he's going to destroy all of mankind with a flood. Well, all but one man and his family. And that guy's name was? Noah, yeah? You didn't have to grow up in church to probably have heard about Noah and the ark and the animals on the ark. And I'd argue with you that the flood may be the most sanitized biblical story we have, from the way we learned it in Sunday school and the way we read about it in kids' books. Because think about it, there are nurseries themed with Noah and the ark and all the cute little animals, right? There are scores of children's books that talk about Noah and the ark. Yet the biblical account of the flood is clear that it was chaos, right? The water and the geological upheaval, it was death and destruction. It was not a Hallmark moment. Noah and his family were not sitting on the ark with some catchy acoustic guitar song in the background, put on a fresh pot of coffee, listening to the rain fall as they chilled with the animals. No, it was chaos. And as the rain began to fall and people started to figure stuff out, they would have come to the ark. It took Noah at least 75 years to build the ark, maybe more. And so people knew, right? It was crazy at that time what he was doing. Word had gotten around. And so they would have made their way to the ark knowing that must be the key, but the ark was shut up tight. Nobody could get in. And so Noah and his family would have heard people pounding on the ark. They would have heard pleading, desperation. Through the openings of the ark, they would have seen death and carnage. And so when we read about the flood, we focus on God's grace and Noah's faithfulness, and rightfully so, because that's what that story is about. But it shouldn't detract from the fact that it was tough. It was grim and grisly, and it would have stuck with Noah and his family, right? They would have had a little bit of trauma and a little bit of survivor's guilt from what they experienced. And so after the flood, the waters recede, and Noah and his family get off the ark, and God gives some instruction to Noah and makes a promise. He makes a covenant with them. And it's a much longer section. We're going to read a couple of the verses because it gives us context for the story we'll look at today. Here's what happens. It says that God blesses Noah and his sons, and he says to them, which is basically all the human race, because they're the only ones left at this time. He says, be fruitful. I think he said that. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. I mean, basically, you guys are the only ones left, so I need you to have kids, and I need you to spread out and cover the earth again, right? And then God makes them a promise. Here's what he promises: that never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. Basically, look, guys, I need you to go out, repopulate the earth, spread out while you're doing it. Don't stay in one place, scatter. And then while you do that, I'm going to make you a promise. You've got my word on this. I'm not going to destroy the earth again with a flood. And so that's what they start doing, right? They start spreading out, and I could get super geeky on you on what pre-flood earth might have been like and theories on how that impacted human life. But what we do know from the Bible is that lifespans were much longer then. And so they could have lots and lots and lots and lots of kids, and they did. And they spread and they repopulated. But then they hit a snag. And that's what we're going to look at today. They hit a snag and decide that they want more than what God has for them. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 11. If you have your Bibles or a Bible app, you can turn there with me. We're going to start in verse 1. Here's what we read in Genesis 11. It says, now the whole earth had one language and a common speech. You might expect that, right? Noah and his kids, so whatever they spoke, their grandkids and so on learned, whatever that language was. And it says that as the people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and they settled there, right? So they're spreading out and they're starting to move out and they're camping out at this plain. Actually, I got a map. This is what we think the earth, the map not make it up? That's okay. Oh, there it is. All right, so here's the Middle East, and we think that the ark landed around here. It's Mount Ararat here. It landed in this area. Lots of words on here, but Ham, Shem, and Japheth, those were Noah's kids. This is where we think they spread out. And the plain of Shinar is right here. And so as they spread, they kind of settled here. And then here's what we read next. It says, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They said they learned to use brick instead of stone, and they used tar for mortar. So they're not in a mountainous area. They don't have like rock and stone they can chisel, but they're getting wiser about the world and tools, so they learn to make bricks out of mud, and they're using tar. Actually, the Hebrew word here refers to a substance that's also waterproof, so they're using that to hold the bricks together. Goes on in verse 4, they said to each other, come, let us build ourselves a city now with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to be scattered over the face of the earth. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this verse, and we're going to do that, but I want to start with at least the most obvious, right? They decided that they were going to stop following God's instructions. Instead of spreading out and scattering and cover the earth, in fact, they want to avoid being scattered. They want to build a city here. They want to stay here. And let's be honest, they could have really good reasons, right? I mean, it could be that the plain had ample food, good water source, maybe the climate was great. You got to figure they got tired of picking up and moving on and picking up and moving on. That had to get old after a while. I mean, and they got bricks now, right? They can make bricks. They got waterproof. Hey, it's great not to get rain in your home now and then, right? So maybe they just felt more secure. It had everything they needed. It felt right. It seemed right. It made sense. And so they wanted to stay there. And I think they had other reasons as well, and we're going to get to those, but I want us to pause for a second because I don't want us to miss something that's really, really important. And that's the fact that when we decide to not follow God's instructions anymore, right, when we want to go in a different direction, that's disobedience. When we decide not to follow what God wants for our lives, that's disobedience. And listen, it doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter why. We could have the best reasons in the world. It seems like today our world says to us, hey, you need to do what you think feels right, what seems right to you. You can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. You can do whatever makes sense to you. And we're told that we should have the freedom to do that. Ironically, we're told it's our God-given right. But a life without borders, that's not what God called us to. And that's not freedom. It's not our God-given right to do whatever we want to do. That's our human nature. That's our sinful human nature. And so we may have great reasons and we may think it's the right thing to do, but it's not. That's just disobedience. It's just a sin. But I think if we relook at this verse, I think you can see something else bubbling to the surface, right? I think you can see something coming up that we can only call out as pride. Here, look at the verse again. They said to each other, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the earth. It's kind of how William Shatner would say that verse. Now, why do I think there's pride in that verse? That's a lot of personal pronouns, isn't it? Hey, you know what? Forget God. We know what's best. We know what we want. We can do this together, and guess what? When we do it, we're going to be famous. We could be legendary, right? Forget what God told us to do. We don't want to be scattered over the earth. There's a lot of personal pronouns. In fact, let me give you this hint. If your reason for doing something is littered with a ton of personal pronouns, it's probably all about you. It's probably about pride. And then we have the matter of the tower, right? The tower that reaches to the heavens. It's almost like they're equating physical height with importance, or physical height with being equal with God. Hey, we can be powerful if we just get up high enough. But I'd submit to you there's something else at the root of what they're trying to do with the tower. I think there's some fear. They have the fear of missing out on survival. I mean, what do you think that the prevailing story was that was told around the campfire for generations? What do you think Noah and his kids talked about that had the most impact on their lives? The flood. The flood. So I don't think there's any coincidence that they're trying to build this tower as high as they can, way out of reach, with, by the way, a substance that's waterproof. Because if it happens again, if there's another flood, we've got a plan and we're going to survive. And to some of us, that seems admirable, right? Because survival is human nature. But again, this human nature is bumping up not just against God's instructions this time, but God's promises. Because God promised not to flood the earth. And so whatever their motivation, the reality is they were disobeying God. They were moving in their own direction. They wanted something more. And so the scripture goes on. Here's what we read, that the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. It was such a big deal. God came down to check it out, to see what the people were building. Here's what God says. If as one people speaking the same language, they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan will be impossible for them. It's kind of like, here they go again, wanting more, going against what I've instructed them. So God says, come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. Verse 8, so the Lord scattered them from there over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. See, they stopped doing what God had instructed them. They wanted more, and so God had to intervene. This wasn't what God had for them at this time. And God didn't intervene out of jealousy. He intervened out of mercy and wisdom. God always knows what's best for us. He knew what was best for them. And guess what? After God intervenes, they go back to doing what he called them to do, to filling the earth, to scattering and fill it all. They just wanted more than what God had for them. You know, when we look at our own lives, right, when we look at our insatiable desire for more, our fear of missing out, the burnout that we feel, it feels like we start with the right reasons sometimes, right? We can convince ourselves we have the right motivation. Maybe for you it's security. Maybe you want to be secure now or in the future. Maybe you just want opportunities for yourself or opportunities for your kids, or we want to make memories and have experiences that last a lifetime. And trust me, those in and of themselves aren't necessarily bad reasons. But for some reason, we can't stop there. We just want more. And it seems that over time, we always start building our own towers of more. We start building a tower, and it might be for the right reasons, but then it becomes me-centered, right? I want this. This is what's best for me. I can do this. Look at me. I'm going to be famous from this. This is all about me. Or maybe we're building our towers out of fear, right? Fear that we're going to prepare for the worst, or we don't want to end up like our parents did, or we want our kids to have opportunities that we didn't have. I mean, how much of what we call ambition today is just really fear? And we may start out with the right reasons, but we start building a tower and we keep building and building and building and building. And then we get to another tower and we build and build and build and build, and we don't know when to stop. And here we are, burned out, stressed and anxious and tired. And so over this next month, as we kind of explore this topic, as we look at God's word for other ways and real practical things we can implement in our life, I want to introduce you to a new concept, a new acronym to replace your FOMO, and that is NOMO. The necessity of missing out. You should have NOMO. I also think, by the way, it's not just a fancy acronym. I think it's a fun saying. You can say, like, when it comes to my FOMO, I ain't doing that no mo. No? Not sure I said that right, but I gave it a try. Here's the thing. I'm convinced that the necessity of missing out is actually central to the gospel message. I think it's a theme in what Jesus taught, because Jesus taught to deny ourselves. He taught us that we should spend our time differently, that we should spend our money differently. Jesus taught that we need to rest in him to provide all we need, that he's our good shepherd. We don't need anything else. There's a necessity of missing out that we need to adopt in our lives. And so as we get ready to explore this topic over the next few weeks, I want to leave you with a couple questions. 2 questions that I want you to think about over this next week, maybe discuss with your family, maybe pray about. And my hope is that these 2 questions will make you a little bit more open-handed over this series, right? That you can maybe listen more intently to what God has for you. And so here's the first question. Where are you on the burnout scale right now? Right? Be honest with yourself. How are you doing physically and mentally and emotionally? Are you anxious and stressed? Are you freaking out? Is it constant more? Where are you on the burnout scale? And if you're married and you're not quite sure, ask your spouse. They'll tell you. And here's the second question then. What tower or towers are you building as you constantly chase more? Right, since we know our burnout's caused by activities and decisions and thought process we have as we constantly chase more, what's the tower or towers that you're constantly building? Maybe your career or your finances or sports or your kids or you name it. What are you constantly chasing more of and building towers? Chasing the coulds instead of the shoulds. And my hope is through the series, through some introspection, through God working within us, that we can adopt this necessity of missing out. Because I think if we can do that, we'll find that we can stop chasing the more, that we can be less anxious and less stressed, and we can stop being burned out. I look forward to what God has for us over the next month. I hope you'll take that journey with us. Let me pray to close us here. Dear Lord, I come to you this morning and I just first thank you for all you have provided. From the very beginning, you've said, I can give you all you need. That we need to rest in you, that we need to trust your promises, that we need to find our identity in you. And we just keep chasing it, keep chasing more. It's part of our nature. And so we just ask that through your word and through your truth and through your spirit, you can help us come to grips with that. That as we are truthful and open-handed to what you have for us, that we'll realize that there's a necessity of missing out, that you have something better for us. We thank you for your word. Amen.